There is no doubt that the situation with respect to criminal violence is creating havoc in the country. The entire nation is in fear as one Jamaican is being murdered every 6 hours. Murders for the year have now passed the 1,000 mark, and we are running in the country at a murder rate which is approximately 25% above last year. In fact, the exact number is 24%. 24.4. Above last year. The recent passage of the Zone of Special Operations legislation has obviously not amounted to much, because despite the urgency with which the legislation was rushed through Parliament, and I say rushed, the fact is that since the Governor General has in fact signed that legislation into existence, nothing has happened excepting that 150 plus Jamaicans have been murdered in that time. Most Jamaicans are appalled and shocked at the failure of the government to act in the face of the spiraling crime rate and the out-of-control murder rate. A mood of hopelessness is gripping the nation as marauding gangsters take control of our streets and communities. Nobody is safe. Our women and children are being murdered at a record pace. With schools about to reopen, there is no guarantee that more of our children in their various communities or even on their way to school will be safe. Over the past week alone, at least 10 Jamaicans have been murdered in Clarendon. This includes 2 children in their home communities. Drive-by shootings in Clarendon, St. James, Hanover, St. Anne, and Kingston and St. Andrew, and in a number of other parishes require immediate police action, but the police cannot act without critical resources. We are deeply concerned as a party at the government's failure to produce a response or a credible plan of action which will enable the country as a whole to rally around the security forces and around some general and comprehensive effort to stem this tide of criminal violence. So, as a consequence of our careful considerations, we are making some specific recommendations to the government and calling for action. First of all, we are insisting that the government immediately restore the approximately $2 billion that was cut from the 2017-18 budget as compared with the 2016-17 budget, to ensure that the security forces are able to get the necessary resources needed to bolster their anti-crime effort. This would include cars, new cars. It would include equipment and technologies, including for intelligence gathering, and it would include basic supplies of gas and other so-called warlike stores that are essential for the police force. We are insisting also that the wage negotiations for the police force be speeded up and brought to swift conclusion, because quite frankly morale is at a very low level in the police force. And there is a high rate of attrition of police personnel, which is making it impossible for the various divisional commanders who face high crime activity to respond effectively. Clarendon is a case in point, where despite this massive response of the criminals, there are only a little bit in excess of 100 police personnel on active duty that can be called upon. It is clearly an inadequate ratio to deal with the problems which we face. Third, we are insisting that the government immediately convene a national stakeholder group, which would include the private sector, the churches, trade unions, civil society organizations, and indeed political organizations, including ourselves, so that we can help define a national consensus around a broad crime-fighting effort. As I have said, we are willing as a party to take part in this effort, and because we think it is essential that all well-thinking Jamaicans come together to confront the scourge of violence in the country. We believe that as soon as Parliament reopens, the legislation which is before the House to establish MOCA as an independent body should be passed. I want to make it clear, however, that we are going to propose an amendment, especially in light of the FLA experience, that would ensure that the oversight board is made up of persons who are not participants in the political process, nor have been in the recent past participants in the political process, and are clearly persons of a high reputation and integrity. But we think it is essential that the MOCA legislation be passed. We also insist that the social intervention programs that have been mooted by the government be immediately put in place and adequately funded, so that the communities that are being affected can have a sense of hope restored. And finally, we think that there is urgent need to ensure that dedicated courts be convened to facilitate the clearing of the backlog of cases, of criminal cases involving acts of violence, be cleared, so that the criminals can be placed on the back foot by the country being assured that there won't be any crimes that go unprosecuted, especially where the police have brought credible cases and which need to be heard. This doesn't really represent the entirety of what needs to be done, but we think as an important set of first steps, this would indicate a clear response to an obviously out of control situation. Thank you very much.